Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at a watch from a newer micro brand. This is from Selten and this is part of their Series 00. This one specifically is the 10B. In case you're not familiar with them, they actually launched on Kickstarter last year. I believe this is their first model, though they do have a Series 01 I believe as well, so they launched two different lineups at the same time. But it was funded last year on Kickstarter, raising I believe $330,000. So it was immensely successful and I'm really excited to check this out. This is now in full production. It is available on their website for direct order. I'll of course have a link down in the description and we'll go into the full details, but this is one I've been excited to check out for a while. So let's go ahead and dive in. Initially, let's check out the packaging. Just like the rest of the watch, they put a lot of attention to detail in the watch box. This actually, for construction, is environmentally friendly. This is made of PET, so recycled plastic for this, so like plastic water bottles. And you'll see it has a unique construction that we'll check out further. Out on the front, you do have the Selten branding that's held with a button there, so you just snap that open. When you open this up at the top, it has a built-in pouch, and it does have the warranty card. You can see nice brush finish. This is a metal construction, and then has your information on the back. Once you shift down, it includes a microfiber cloth, again branded there. This came wrapped in so much plastic. So it was wrapped around the pillow and then the full watch itself. Every aspect of it was completely covered in plastic, so they make sure you could get it safely. But one of the things that's cool is you can actually pop open these sides as well. And the reason for this being is another environmental conscious aspect, and this allows them to actually ship them flat. So it not only makes it more economical, but it makes it more environmentally friendly so they can fit a lot of these in a container. Really cool touch. All right, now that we have a better feel for how the watch ships, let's take a deep dive into the specs on this particular one. First, I do want to mention before we get too deeply in that this one, for administrative matters, was sent into the channel for review. I don't have to send it back. It is one of the production units, so do keep all that in mind as we go throughout. As far as the basic specs, it comes with a 1-year warranty standard. As far as the watch size, it is measured right on at 40 millimeters, and that's from roughly the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock. The bezel steps down, as you can see here, and that's coming in at 39 millimeters, so just a slight step down. The lugs are a universal 20 millimeters. The lug to lug is 47.9 millimeters, and as we'll see, it does have female end links, so that's a pretty dead-on measurement there. The thickness is coming in at 12.7 millimeters, and that is including this flat sapphire crystal, which does have 5 layers of inner AR coating. And as you can see, that does sit slightly proud there, so that adds probably 0.2, 0.3 millimeters to that overall size. As far as the movement, this one, as you can see right off the bat, is a day-date complication. And this specifically is going to be a Meteorite 9 series, but it's one I don't recall checking out before. It's the 9132. It's going to be similar to other 9 series movements in that it does have everything you'd expect. It's an automatic movement. It does have hacking, hand winding. This one does have a ghost position, so that first click, it is set up for a date, which as you can see, there's no date window on this, so it does have that ghost position for it. It beats just like the other 9 series at 28,800 beats per hour, but then the biggest differentiator is going to be at the 6 o'clock. You have that day and night complication, which we'll look at throughout. Really, really cool effect on this, and we'll talk about that much more. As far as water resistance, this is just going to be more or less splash resistant. It's 50 meters or 5 atmospheres, so it's fine for your day-to-day needs, and in keeping with the kind of dressier sports style of this, I don't think it's bad. It's not a dive watch. I always like to see at least 100 meters, but I'm really not going to complain here, especially because it kept the overall features relatively slim, and I prefer that than some extra water resistance. As far as the bracelet, this bracelet does come standard, as you can see, and we'll look at this much further throughout. Sized to my 6.5 inch wrist, this is coming in at 129.8 grams. It does also have a strap that's included, and we'll look at this further as well. But this leather strap here, this is on the strap coming in at 78.8 grams for that, and it does have quick release spring bars, as we'll see on the bracelet as well. So now that we have a better feel for the basic specs of the watch, let's go ahead and check and deeper dive into this one. First, for the colors. This is going to be available in 3 different Meteorite variants. There's the natural Meteorite that we're looking at today, which is a more traditional gray coloration with just the etch finishing. There's also a black version and then a blue version. So you have 3 different choices there for the Meteorite dial. There's additionally going to be an Aventurine finish, which is really sweet for that as well, and that does have still the Meteorite on the day-date complication that we'll talk about. That's going to be available, as we'll see, in two different handsets. There's the Lance style that we're looking at today, and then there's also a Pontiff handset, and there's each of those colors that are available in each of those two different handsets. Each of these dials, depending on which version you go with, is going to have plentiful of texture. The Meteorite, of course, as if you've ever had Meteorite before, you know those striations are going to be very pronounced. With having the different color options, I personally am a sucker for the natural, which is why I picked this variant. But that being said, with the PVD coated black or blue, that's going to have a lot of texture to that as well. And then of course Aventurine, we've looked at that in the past and we'll look at another version. That always has a nice glimmer and sparkle to that, so lots of texture there as well. This does have a logo, and that is an applied logo at the 12 o'clock. Certainly very pronounced, but I don't think it's overbearing at all, especially on an otherwise relatively sterile dial. Down at the 6 o'clock position, there is a framed day date, so it does have a nice border around that to frame that in. In the day date complication, one of the coolest features of this is it actually inlays Meteorite into that. So you have the lighter moon there, or the lighter, I guess, sun, that would be the daytime, and then at nighttime you have the black Meteorite. So it has the dual coloration, and that's true across the lineup as well. So really cool touch. But additionally, it has those stars that are applied. Those are not going to be Meteorite there, but depending on the way that the light hits them, they actually pick up a really deep contrast against that kind of blackish finish, and it has such a cool effect to that, where it really does get like a twinkling, shimmering star effect to that as well. So awesome touch there. Additionally, as you go out towards the perimeter of it, there's going to be first a step up where there's a metal ring, and that's going to be significant when we talk about those indexes in just a moment. And then as you go further out, there's another step up, and that does take you to a more traditional chapter ring, which in this case is going to be a gray, and it does have the minute and second hashes all the way around there to help for excellent legibility as well. Shifting over to the hardware, on this particular one that we're looking at, I chose the Lance style handset, but again, as we mentioned, there is a Pontiff as well. So with those, you're going to, of course, get a very different visual aesthetic between the two options. One of the things that you'll see is on the Lance handset, we'll look at the loom here momentarily, that does have loom, whereas the Pontiff does not include, I don't believe, any loom on that at all. There's going to be a satin finish on the Lance handset, whereas the second hand is going to be, on both variants, is a blue, heat blued. So that is not an applied blue, that is actually a heat blue, which is a nice touch there, and I think complements especially on this natural Meteorite really well. I'm really a big fan of the gray and blue color combinations. Going back to the indexes, you're going to see that these are a baton style index, and it does change up the overall texture on that in that it does match with the frame for the day-night complication, and that is going to be polished. They are baton style indexes, and in this case, you can see that these have a black loom applied to them, which is actually a C3 with a black tint. One of the coolest effects, though, is that this is going to be a floating index set. So that metal ring there, I believe they're attached to that. So they actually float over the chapter ring as well as over the dial itself. So at acute angles, you can really see these just kind of hover over that dial, and it's just such an intriguing effect. And it adds so much to the overall depth that this watch already exhibits, from the use of the texture to the stepping of the various rings to then having the floating indexes out there. It's just such a cool touch, and it's not something you see very commonly. Shifting back to the loom that we were talking about a moment ago, these on the hands on both your hour and minute have BGW9 applied. Shifting over to the markers, they have on this particular variant a C3, and again that is a black tint to that. As far as the loom performance, I would say it's adequate. It's nothing to write home about. Certainly this isn't a loom monster, just like with the water resistance. I think it's in keeping with the style of the watch, and certainly I'm glad to at least have the loom touch on this particular handset variant. Shifting out to the bezel is going to be a fixed configuration, and as you can see here, it does have a nice slope, which I really think bridges between the case and that crystal, with being set back slightly and then having that nice slope that just flows up. The texture on this is going to be what I've described as like a sunburst pattern for that, or a radial pattern. So it does have linear, but it does radiate out from the center for that application as the primary finish. Out on the lip, it does have a very tasteful and very subtle little polished accent, which helps to break up, again, the texture between the case and the bezel. So I think that's another nice touch as well. Speaking of the case is going to continue with a predominant finish of being brushed as well. This does run with linear brushing from the front to the rear of the case, which I know many people prefer, so horizontal brushing, and I personally do like that as well. Additionally, it does, again, carry through with the polish accents, gorgeous polishing down underneath, and then just that little kiss and lip to break up the lugs in the case, as well as the transition to the bezel. So nice little accent touch there to kind of break things up. This does have downturned lugs, and as you can see, they come, I would say, just slightly past the case back. Not enough that they dig into your wrist or anything like that, though I do have a smaller wrist than some, but I don't expect that it's going to be an issue for anybody, and I'm glad to see that that does carry through just to kind of tuck it into the wrist a little more. As far as the lugs, you can see it does have a nice curvature and slope to that, keeping nice slim, and I think in keeping with the overall style, which kind of blends, it's really in the sport dress style function, as you'll see with the mix of polish and brushing as well. One of the things that you can't see here is there are actually a unique application. So while they don't have drilled lugs as far as on the exterior, interior, they do actually have dual lug holes. The significance of that is it allowed them to have the placement that was desired for the bracelet to get the nice perfect flow that you can see here with that integration, and it is a very clean integration. But additionally, it allowed the clearance to be able to put on different straps, so whether you use that leather or use a strap of your own, and I think that was a really good attention to detail and thought there. Shifting over to the crown side, as you can see, and I imagine would expect for this style of watch, it does not have an integrated crown guard, so that's just an exposed crown there. Speaking of the crown, that is coming in at 5.7 millimeters, so it is a little bit on the smaller side. However, I find that it comes out far enough and has enough of a depth there that it's actually quite easy to grab a hold of, so I haven't had any issues with that. Functions just perfectly. As far as the configuration, as you can see here, it is just a push-pull configuration, so not a screw down, and again, in keeping with the style and water resistance. The predominant finish on this is polishing, and you can see it has a nice raised sign logo there, and I think that's really nicely done and a good touch, and I think blends to the aesthetic, and I actually like their logo a lot, so I think that's cool as well. Shifting over to the case back. The case back on this is a screw construction. It is one of the more interesting case backs that I've seen. Beyond the screw, it does have the blasting texture, so they do a lot of playing with the texture, and that's set against more of a polish accent as well, so that really still has that pop there too. Additionally, they have, for the shape of it, it is what I would describe as kind of being a concave shape up to that exhibition glass, and that's a really unique touch as well. But once you get to the exhibition glass, one of the things that really takes me is, I've got to say, this rotor, it is one of the most attractive rotors I've seen at any price point. I think it is extremely well done. I like the coloration. I like the brushed finish to that. I like the way that it's kind of skeletonized and incorporates their logo, which I think is a really cool touch. And then the outer perimeter of having that traditional rotor shape to it, and then the Selten namesake on there. Just excellent job overall, and great attention to detail on something that's oftentimes overlooked with the case back. Shifting out to the bracelet, as we already mentioned, is 20 millimeters at the lugs. It does taper down significantly to 16 millimeters, which again, I think is keeping in with the style, and I do think helps to bring the weight down, which is something that's welcome here. It has female end links up at the, female first links rather, up at the end links. The configuration is going to be an H-link construction, and it does alternate between polished center links as well as brushed for your actual H's, similar to a Dorenzo DRZ04 that we'll look at here shortly. The bracelet itself is held in with screws, and it does have polishing on the exterior of that as well, so really again mixes with that texture. One of the things that's nice is, despite the fact that this has a butterfly clasp to it, and the butterfly clasp is signed, has nice incorporation there for that, really integrates seamlessly. I like the fact that the one side does have that protrusion that nests and tucks in. You got to make sure you have that pushed up and pops into place. But one of the things that's great is you can see here this larger link, they actually do include standard a 1 1/4 or 1 1/2. I call it a 1 1/2. I believe they call it a 1 1/4. So you can actually get some micro adjustment just by changing out those links. This does not come installed, at least when I received it. It just had the standard links, but it has that in the box. So you can really get it fine-tuned, which was quite welcome for me, and allowed me to use this butterfly comfortably without having to worry about the typical of kind of being hit and miss there. As far as the articulation on this, I've got to say, it's excellent. I find that oftentimes to be the case with H-Link, and this one's no exception. It freely articulates, it curves around, it drapes well, just across the board. Great free moving, hasn't pulled my hair, haven't had any kind of issues there, and just excellent all the way around for that. Very pleased. Additionally, it is held in with quick release spring bars, so it again is going to be very easy to change, and then you do have those dual lug holes, so that way you can put whatever option you want without issue. Going back to the strap that we looked at earlier, the strap here, again, is included. This is a leather style strap. It does have nice stitching on the exterior, if I can keep that in my hands. This also is going to be 20 millimeters, of course, for at the top, it says 120 there. I believe this is a 70. Yeah, so it's 120 by 70 as far as the length. This is by this brand, which I'm not familiar with, so it looks like they are third-party sourced, and they do not have any signing of Selten themselves. Polished buckle for that. Overall, seems like a pretty nice quality, and it does have quick-release spring bars. One of the things that's nice here, it has kind of a flat head. Still easy to grip a hold of, but it shouldn't dig in as much. I have not used this myself. Many of you probably know I don't use leather, but there's an idea as to what that looks like. All right, so now that we have a better feel for the watch, let's go ahead and bring in just a few comps so we can get an idea as to how this one presents. First, I naturally wanted to pull in, here is another natural meteorite. This is a Zelos Nova, and you can see here kind of just the different effect and visual of having that natural meteorite. This one has a little more of the heat blue application as opposed to just the second hand on this one, but you can see overall fairly similar aesthetic, and this is one that I love, so that's not a bad thing, hence why I picked that. Bringing in another Nova, this one is the Aventurine. Just wanted to give you an idea there as far as kind of how this would present for the different texture for that if you choose the Aventurine version. And you can see sizing, I think these are relatively similar. Despite the fact that this is a 40, it has a little more of a setback with the bezel. This one comes in, I believe, 38 or maybe 39 millimeters. I think it's a 38 though, but you can see dial real estate is going to be similar with this having chapter ring, those kind of things for that. But that gives you an idea as far as how the Aventurine would present. Really cool touch there. And then mentioned earlier, the Dorenzo, this is the DRZ04, and this one is also a 40 millimeter, so that just gives you an idea of sizing. Again, I think the dials are pretty comparable as far as sizing, sticking with the gray coloration, but the main thing I wanted to look at, you can see this is a much thinner bracelet, of course this one with being integrated, whereas this is traditional lugs, but you can see fairly similar aesthetic as far as the brush and polish application. So I think that's another one I really enjoy as well. So that's a good accent there. So the sizing, I think, is pretty well what you would expect for it, and I think it's very reasonably sized for most wrists. So let's go ahead and, now that we have a better feel for the watch itself, wrap things up with the positives, my view of some critiques, and there are a few, as well as the overall summary. First, for the positives. I love the fact that this is an original design. It's not one that I can recall seeing anything like it, from the little touches with the applied indexes to the day-date complication, all those kind of aspects. And I personally think it's stunner. I really like this a lot. Each of the colorways I think look great. This is my personal favorite for it, though it wasn't easy to pick one. The comfort is fantastic. Between the bracelet articulation, the nice balanced weight, the relatively slim profile, the good sizing, across the board, excellent comfort. It's been a joy to wear. And that includes actually that butterfly clasp. Not a complaint there. The complication, as we already mentioned there, it's an uncommon use. I can't recall in the microband space in particular seeing many, if any, others that have the day-date complication. And it's just a cool touch. It's not necessarily something that's a necessary thing, just like a 24-hour aspect is not as far as markers. But personally, I like this a lot more than the standard 24-hour. It gives you still the same effect, but with having a 12-hour configuration and a neat accent for that. So that I think is cool. The floating markers, that's one of those design elements that I just think is such a great touch overall and just adds to that depth and just gives so much more pop and just is a cool effect. The overall depth as a whole, that has to be a plus. This has so much depth going on to it with all the different layers, with things being dipped in, with raised bezels, or with raised framing there, with the dial being set in, then a step layer, then a step layer, then the floating indexes. Just a lot of depth, something I really appreciate, and I think you will as well. The attention to detail, all of the things we've been talking about there, this has great attention to detail. The Pontiff hand, just as an example, as it goes around, it actually is designed specifically to overlap so it perfectly encompasses the day-date. So whichever one you're at, when you cross across that, it's going to capture that little circle down in there. Just little touches like that, as well as the drilled lug holes, all those kind of things. Very, very cool. And then the pricing. I think the pricing is actually quite reasonable. It was fantastic at the Kickstarter pricing. It has jumped up slightly. The retail price on this is $6.99. However, as of time of recording, this is only coming in $579, which some of you might say, $579, it's not the cheapest. And no, it's not. But using Aventurine, using Meteorite, having multiple applications of Meteorite, having a day-date complication, sapphire crystal, coming with a bracelet and a strap for it, I really don't think you can go wrong with that, and I think it's a great value overall personally. As far as the cons, though, there are some pieces that I would like to see changed. In particular, on this natural Meteorite variant, I have to say that the legibility I don't think is amazing with this handset. With having the white application with the BGW9, as well as the satin gray handset against a gray dial, it does kind of wash out. It hasn't been a problem per se, but certainly the legibility could be improved. I wish that they would have, even though it would have diminished the lume, stuck with that C3, that black tinted C3 on this handset. I think that would have been a good touch. And then additionally, I wouldn't have minded if they stuck with a polished accent as well, though I don't mind the satin hands for that. But I do think that would have helped, at least on this variant, for the contrast. But I understand probably MOQs or what have you, minimum order quantities, that they stuck with the same handset throughout for that. And I can understand that, but it is something I'd like to see improved. As far as the Fimo end links, one of the nice things with the Fimo end links is great articulation, great comfort for the wrist. One of the downsides, especially with being polished, is as you can see, it does nest in there. Naturally, you're going to get rub marks. I got them pretty much immediately. For that, as you open this up, if you're not careful, you will rub on the inside of that end link. So do note, especially with being the polished, you can relatively easily polish because this doesn't, I don't believe, have a hardened coating. So you can polish that back to condition. But that being said, that is something to be aware of in its natural aspect. As far as the butterfly clasp, as I already mentioned, it does come with a 1.5 or 1.25 link that you can see here. So that's great, but at the same time, it's not a replacement for true micro adjust. So in general, if you are not a fan of butterfly clasp, that unfortunately is your option on the bracelet here. So that's going to be a critique for some. For me, it's worked out just fine when I popped that on. So really not a problem at all. And that's just something I did want to note, but it's really implicit in the fact that it has a butterfly clasp. So where does that leave us overall? At the end of the day, I think this is an amazing watch. This was one that I was excited to check out, and it has not let me down. Across the board, it surprised me as just how much attention to detail they have, how well everything was executed, especially for the money. I think it's a very, very good buy overall. The use of materials, as well as the materials that they use. And by that, I mean Meteorite and Aventurine, great material choices, but then also having the Meteorite for the day-date complication, those kind of touches, I think it's just excellent. The design, the attention to detail for all of that, great pieces as well. So across the board, I think this one is a winner. This is one that if I didn't already have one in my collection, now, after having experienced, I'd definitely be buying one myself. So I hope this video has been helpful for you in getting to know this. If you did enjoy this, please do hit that like button. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, give that subscribe button a tap. Thanks for watching.